Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Newmark again, and since we likely have a student video this week, I'm going to try to keep my video shorter, but we'll see how that goes. So let's jump right in. So today, this video will include content concerning Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure. That's how I was taught to say his name as a graduate student. We will be dealing with a few small aspects of his third course of lectures on general linguistics. We're going to look at an article by Chandler called Semiotics for Beginners that helps to sort of like disambiguate some of the main themes in Saussure's work, and then Peirce's What is a Sign? Okay, so Saussure. My first bullet point here reads, the relationship between the written language and what lies beneath it, real spoken language and its graphic sign, is what we are mainly concerned about here today, within the larger umbrella of semiotics. You may or may not have heard of semiotics before, but I know we have students in this class from our three major areas, creative writing, rhetoric and writing, and literary studies, and we have students from outside of our department. So some of you may have come across semiotics in your studies before now. Maybe you've taken linguistics and you've come across it. Some of you may not have. So I want you to think about this concept in a very elemental way. So real spoken language, like I'm using right now to speak to you, has a relationship that we have made up as humans who develop sign systems with the graphic sign that I'm using on the screen to communicate with you. So think about what I'm saying verbally and what I'm showing on the screen in alphabetic text. So there is a relationship between these things. What I want you to do is really probe and trouble that relationship and think about whether there is any sort of like cognitive or logical relationship between the words we utter and the way that we represent them textually or symbolically or through other kinds of visual means, pictorially. So once we introduce more technologized facets to this conversation, like the way photographs are rendered or digital animation or something like that, like what is the relationship between those representations and the idea of those forms, symbols, shapes, objects, then we see how semiotics helps us to develop a vocabulary, a nuanced and sophisticated vocabulary around the relationship between the ideas in our head, the utterances we make out of our mouths, and the meaning we're trying to convey through shared vocabularies. So there's an idea, a vocal sign, and a symbolic sign. So my professor, when I was an undergraduate student describing this, I remember he was talking about a chair, and there was a chair in the front of the classroom, and he like moved it to the side and sort of moved it around to indicate the physicality of this chair, that it was made of materials that combined to comprise this thing that we could sit in. We knew what it was used for. You knew that, chairs are generally somewhat mobile. You can sit down in it to rest, but it did not have any inherent relationship to the word chair in English, or whatever chair is in other languages. There's no inherent relationship between those two things. It is a convenience. It is a device that humans have used over time to unite different understandings of a similar built object or natural phenomenon to come up with the same term to describe it verbally. So there's the idea, there's the vocal sign, the chair, and then there's the symbolic sign, which in the case of the written word chair is comprised of alphabetic text, these letters that combine in a certain order to represent chair. So for the purposes of our class, these symbols, alphabetic text, are visually rhetorical, they are purposeful, they are persuasive. They conjure within us through their combination an idea of something so that we all can, have pop into our mind something that looks sort of similar. When I write chair, or one of you in the class writes chair, something pops into our head and it's similar. We know that general phenomenon. So there are vast systems of signs and they all have a social role. Communication is a social act, so words do not exist without a signified as well as a signifying element. And I'll talk about this more in a few slides in the future. But these all presuppose an interaction with a language system. So there's something being signified or represented, and there's something doing the signifying, which is the language, oral, written, textual. We will, probe that a little bit further in a moment. So this large concept of the arbitrariness of the sign is something that I really want you to think about and take away from this presentation and these readings. It's very, very important for thinking about persuasive visual communication. So the sign, the textual sign comprised of these symbolic alphabetic textual forms, as I already mentioned, is arbitrary. There is no reason for it to be that. Other than it's been an agreed upon system by the users of that system. So Saussure was interested in semiological facts in societies. He writes, "Let us go back to the language considered as a product of society at work. It is a set of signs fixed by agreement between the members of that society. These signs evoke ideas, but in that respect, it's like rituals, for instance." Think about that. This is a really powerful idea. But I have to stop myself from like pontificating for 10 minutes on each slide. So let's jump to the next one. So regarding technical communication and its reliance on words as symbolic systems, Saussure's statement concerning systems is resonant. He writes, "A word is always first and foremost a member of a system interconnected with other words, sometimes in one order of relations, sometimes in another." Now, when people think about technical writing, they think about communication that is audience-driven, purposeful, simple, clear, often technical, and the simplified technical English is something we may talk about later this semester, but there are ways to make the combination of words used simple enough that it's easy to translate, or it's reducible to only a certain number of options. So technical communication is supposed to be concise, simple, and clear in the interest of avoiding many options for interpretation or ambiguity, because those kinds of variances can result in danger to the user or confusion amongst actors in the system. Like if the documentation in an airplane concerning the exit routes is ambiguous or unclear or too verbose, it won't be usable by the people who are using it in its optimal, hopefully never encountered, but the context of use in which it was envisioned to be used, which is the evacuation moment on an airplane. They ask you to read it first. I don't know that you're going to be picking up that leaflet on your way out of the plane on a slide, but it needs to be unambiguous. It can't be left for various kinds of interpretation. So in that example, an evacuation pamphlet, emergency procedures pamphlet on an airplane, we see that they combine visual symbols, icons, in order to avoid the ambiguity of textual communication, alphabetic text in various languages, because the dimension of translation would make it completely obscured to people who aren't immersed in that language system. So the visual vocabulary becomes the agreed upon set of symbolic signs that are used to convey that information. So that's a technical communication example where we see that the words and images are members of systems, and they are interconnected with either words, which are comprised of symbolic signs, but they're combined with others to make meaning. They are in relationship to each other to make a larger meaning to convey a certain message for users. So Chandler, this reading from Chandler I included because I thought it did a really clear job of like consolidating or compressing down a whole lot of really complicated information. So if you remember very little about semiotics, I hope you'll remember this. So Saussure's theory was based on the relationality between things. So relationality of signifying systems is central to structuralist theory. So Saussure's theory, and you have this little image here in the box. So meaning equals concept, form equals sound image. And this is a psychological process where we have a thought of a tree, and then we have a thought of the word tree. So how do these things function together? They're enclosed in a circle here as if they coexist and are mutually reliant. So there are two fundamental characteristics of the linguistic sign. The relationship between these two things is the sign. So the link between signal and signification is arbitrary, as I've already explained. So since we're treating a sign as the combination in which a signifier is associated with a signified, we can express this more simply as the linguistic sign, and it is arbitrary. So in the image on the right, we see that the sign, again, is comprised of the signified, which is this thought of the tree, and the signifier, which is what does the signifying, that's the signifier, which is that word tree. That is what we use as the shorthand that we all understand to conjure up this image of a green leafy grown thing on a brown trunk. That is a tree. We recognize that. So words are signs. A signifier is a form associated with morphology, phonology. The signified is the meaning or the semantics, so how the utterance works, how we represent it. So a combination of words, sentence structure with a certain syntax, is used to generate a larger set of understandings as comprised through this sign system. So Peirce adds an additional layer to this vocabulary. And I actually, once I learned these terms years ago, I use them all the time. I actually did a visual rhetoric walk with the Nob Hill News, which is an online local newspaper, in early August, where I walked through Nob Hill with a journalist, and I talked about these kinds of signs. And as I saw them represented in the environment around me in Nob Hill, just east of UNM, and I will link that article to you. You might find it interesting. So anyway, we see icons, which are likenesses. An icon is something that you look at and you're like, oh yeah, that's a bicycle. I see that. Or the trash can on the desktop of your computer. You're like, okay, that's a trash can. I know what that does. Let me drag my documents to it to be like abolished from my computer. So it is a trash can. We see something that is a likeness. We know what that is in the real world, and we know what it represents in the digital world, like on the screen here of this slide presentation. And then we have indexical signs, which are indices. This one is the hardest one for students to understand. They, in this image, include a skull and crossbones. Now, I think of an indexical sign as a sign that conveys like an action or a consequence or suggests a process. So you see a thought bubble drawn in a cartoon. That is also an indexical sign. It conveys something happening. So, or a consequence in this case with the skull and crossbones. If you see this on a medicine bottle, it indicates that there is some negative after effect because it's a cipher for death in this case. A really famous indexical sign is footprints on a beach. So that indicates that somebody was there before a movement happened there. You can also see this in an illustration of like a fire or something with the little tendrils of smoke coming up. That also conveys a certain kind of action. And finally, we have a symbol, which has a common understanding among people who know that symbol, but to those who don't, it means nothing. Like the artist formerly known as Prince developed a symbol to convey what he meant as a musician, what he meant as an artist, what he meant as like his purple highness or whatever terms people used to describe him. It encapsulated within it so many things about who he was, Prince, as an entertainer and a musician and artist. So the symbol becomes a shorthand for a whole wide array of other facets of common understanding or language or knowing. And our alphabet, indeed, is a symbolic system. So this reference in this slide and the next one has directly to do with technical and professional communication. So Killingsworth and Gilbertson in 1992 engaged with the question of what is the relationship between these semiotic concepts and the work that technical communicators do? How does all of this relate to an idea that I shared a few weeks ago concerning science systems of persuasive images and reproducibility, which is at the heart of technical communication. This goes back to Berger and the concept of reproducibility of images. Now, the Mona Lisa, as she appears on the wall in the Louvre, on a t-shirt, on a mug, that's a reproducible image, a facet of mechanical reproduction, as we've already discussed. But is the image of Mona Lisa persuasive in any way? I'm not sure. But the documentation that goes with your new digital camera or your new cell phone or your computer or any kind of documentation that you might get with a product, that is mechanically reproduced and it is intended to be persuasive. So this question is at the heart of technical communication. How do we use these semiotic concepts to unambiguously convey concrete, usable information to a specific audience? So Killingsworth and Gilbertson write this. Clearly enough, the texts of technical communication are systems composed of signs. They are designed to represent a reality and to be interpreted by knowing readers. But if we take a semiotic view of the relation of text and technology, we can say that technical actions are themselves also signs and are a part of the same sign system that include the text. This is super interesting. So if we perform the action that we are instructed to perform as a result of watching a tutorial or reading a how-to guide, those actions themselves are also signs and are a part of the same sign system that are included in the text. It's just a continuation of those activities, those semiotic activities. They add this. So thus the action from our point of view, Killingsworth and Gilbertson, is a sign, a presence that stands for an absence. We read the action as a sign, much in the same way that we draw connections between a photograph and its subject or a word and its referent. So like if you read a procedure and envision how the action is supposed to take place, like a standard operating procedure of something, that itself enacts this kind of play between these systems of signs. It conveys a presence in the place of absence. If you are imagining how a process takes place, that creates the presence of that action in your mind. So they add further. The very idea of usability testing depends upon the belief that actions represent a text. A usable manual is one that leads the user from reading to acting. The person giving the test infers that acting and reading are connected in the successful operation of a sign system consisting of the manual and the product. And so in the final slide today, I wanted to show you a manual. There's so much going on here, and I would love to talk about this more, but we have a quick start guide for a camera. Attach the camera strap, charge, attach a lens, and insert the memory card. And we see that both in English and in Spanish on the right side. So translation itself is an act of moving from one sign system to another. It, in a way, requires a kind of leap of faith in order to expect this imagined process to be conveyed and enacted in the same way across these two symbolic systems. And as Killingsworth, as they were saying in the past slide, this demonstration, this visual information that's conveyed in this technical document are supposed to elicit from the user a particular response, which is an action that replicates the process that's being shown through various semiotic signs that are shown in this guide. You see here all three kinds, I would say, of signs. We have icons, we have indexical signs, and we have symbols. I really would love to deconstruct that for you, but what I want you to do is to actually do it yourself. Back this video up, look back at that slide by Peirce where the icon, the indexical sign, and the symbol are explained. Listen again to what I said, or go back to the readings and kind of tease it out yourself and look at this technical document and see how those operate within this context. It's super important to understand their persuasive power. And on that note, I'm going to end this video, and I'm going to wish you a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.